Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. Thank you for your time. Goodbye. Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. With COVID cases rising across the country and with the Times of India reporting this morning that they've increased by 60% in the last week, is India on the brink of a fourth wave, or is there another far more reassuring explanation? And secondly, how concerned should we be about the new variants of Omicron, BA.4 and BA.5? Those are the two key issues I should raise today with Professor of Virology at the Christian Medical College in Vellore and a member of the COVID working group, Gagandeep Kang. Professor Kang, on Saturday, India's COVID cases increased by 13,235. And since it's been a weekend thereafter, those are perhaps the most reliable cases we have. And it's been the highest for almost 4 months since the 26th of February. The positivity rate was 2.73. And today, Monday's Times of India says that nationwide cases have increased in the last week by 60%. Do you fear India is entering a fourth wave, or is there another more reassuring explanation for what we're experiencing?
Well, it really depends on what you call a wave. If it's going to be an increase in just the number of cases, then this is the shape of things to come. There will be ups and downs. Cases will increase and decline over time. Then you have to decide what your definition of a wave is, how high and over what period of time. I think the time actually has come for us to switch to what is a more realistic definition of a wave, which is how much severe disease are we seeing? How many hospitalizations, how many deaths? And if we look at it that way, then I don't think we are in a wave yet. And that new wave, if and when it happens, is most likely going to be a new variant rather than the versions of the variants that we are seeing now.
I noticed that 3 states always seem to be, if I can use that colloquial phrase, top of the pops. They are Maharashtra, Kerala, and Delhi. Why are they always the first to shoot up?
Well, you could make the argument that these are the states where a lot of international travel happens. And therefore, if there were new viruses or new variants coming in, these would be the places that would see them first. Now, while that held true at the beginning of the pandemic, I'm not sure that that is really the case anymore. These are the places where testing happens in a perhaps more systematic fashion than in other places. If we take a look at Kerala, for example, Kerala's test positivity rate last week was 16%, and that sounds awful, except for the fact that Kerala's test positivity rate since the beginning of the pandemic is 13%. So their testing strategy has been very different from those of other states. They tend to test when there is cause for testing. They tend to test more where cases are rising in any case. So I don't think it's these states are necessarily predictors of what will happen countrywide, but I do think that these states are places that have a more rational approach to testing, a more complete approach to testing, and that includes not just testing, but also sequencing.
Now, do you believe that this spike that we're witnessing at the moment, or mini wave, or up and down, or whatever you want to call it, is caused by BA.4 and BA.5 rather than BA.1, BA.2, or is it still BA.1 and BA.2?
Based on global data, I'm inclined to think that this is more likely to be BA4 and 5 because they infect people who have previously had BA1 infections. If we look back at the sequencing data that was provided by INSACOG, it seems like India had a fair amount of both BA1 and 2 in January. And it seems unlikely that you would get infections again with 2 that quickly. Nonetheless, the INSACOG data shows that most of what we are seeing now is BA2 and 2.38. Now, is that really because these are the circulating strains, or is this a result of some lag between the collection of the samples and the INSACOG data being generated? It could be any of these.
There has been, I'm told, a certain delay in INSACOG making its data public. Is that a cause of concern? Is that one of the reasons why you refer to a lag?
INSACOG does take time to put its data out. There was a long gap in the beginning of the year. It seems to be partially addressed now, and I hope that they keep it up. As with everything else, real-time data really, really matters. And it would be great not only if INSACOG were to make its data more readily available, but also if there was an approach to allowing more private sequencing data to be generated and be shared. Currently, that is not the case.
In other words, you're saying two things. A, INSACOG needs to be more efficient and faster in making its data available. And secondly, we should allow private sequencing of data, because that would not just expedite sequencing, but increase the quantity of sequencing that's done.
Absolutely.
What do we know about BA.4 and BA.5? Studies in South Africa have established that they're more infectious than BA.1 and BA.2, but the disease they cause is not severe, and hospitalization and serious illness has not increased. Would you agree with those South African findings?
Yes, I think I will state that with one caveat up front, which is that any variant in the right person can cause severe disease and also result in death. That is, people who are, we know, at risk of severe disease, people who are unvaccinated, people who have diabetes or other comorbid conditions. So any variant can kill. Nonetheless, if we take the entire population and put them together, this is a situation where the variant we are seeing is more infectious, as it has to be, because it has to infect people who have been vaccinated or infected before. But it causes, fortunately for us, relatively mild disease.
So those two facts together, it may be more infectious, but it causes relatively mild disease. Hospitalizations are low, serious illness is low, and all the figures available from Delhi make that crystal clear. Something like 98, 99% of Delhi COVID beds are actually empty is reassuring, isn't it?
Absolutely.
How effective is immunity from previous infection against BA4, BA5? And secondly, how effective are India's existing vaccines against these two subvariants? And I suppose I mean primarily Covishield and Covaxin.
So BA4 and 5 are relatively new. So there has been very little data that looks at the impact of previous vaccination as well as previous infection with a range of variants. against those specific variants. In general, all of the Omicron variants you don't have protection against infection. They seem to be able to infect people who have been vaccinated or infected before. We are also seeing Omicron reinfections. So reinfection is not something that we should be worrying about. This will happen and will happen more frequently in the future as we move further and further away from the time that we got vaccinated or boosted. This does not mean that there is going to be no protection against severe disease or against the disease that is severe enough to result in mortality. Vaccines and prior infections seem to be giving us reasonably good protection against severe disease with all of the Omicron variants.
Against that particular answer, then, how do you view a report published in the Hindustan Times on the 17th, just 3 days ago, that nearly 82% of people in Delhi between the ages of 18 and 60 have missed their booster dose? And presumably that means they've done it deliberately. And according to the same paper, nationwide, only 3.5% of adults under 60 have so far been boosted. How much of a concern are those two facts?
Well, we know that a booster dose gives some incremental level of protection. Now, in most people who are young, under the age of 60 and without comorbidities, do they really need a booster? I'm not clear about that. It does not seem to me that anywhere in the world there is evidence that for a public health program, we should be boosting people under the age of 60 within the time frame that we have done so and others in the world have done so. I think we were in a rush in an evolving pandemic to provide as much protection as possible. And we may have, in some cases, given too many doses too soon. Now, there are lots of outstanding questions. Do you actually need 3 doses for your primary series in a person who is previously uninfected? Should it be 2 doses? If we need to boost, is it 6 months or 9 months or 12 months or 2 years? Does that vary with age group? Does that vary with comorbidities? Should we be looking at vaccines that protect against a broader range of viruses? There are lots of outstanding questions. I'm not particularly worried about people under the age of 60 without comorbidities who have only received 2 doses of vaccine. However, for people with comorbidities and those who are elderly, because in them the risk is higher, if they haven't yet gotten a booster, it may make sense before the winter to actually get a booster dose.
That's very clear. It also suggests that some of the emphasis the press puts on the fact that a particularly small percentage of people between the ages of 18 and 60 have taken boosters is somewhat misleading, and it tends to create a sense of apprehension which is not necessary. Let me put something else to you. On the 16th, the Standing Technical Subcommittee of NTAGI recommended reducing the gap between the second dose and the booster dose to 6 months from the present gap of 9 months. In your eyes, was that a wise decision or was it somewhat unnecessary?
So the way I look at it, there was no evidence that it needed to be 9 months. There was no evidence that it needed to be 6 months or 3 months or 12 months. So I think if you are going to go ahead and make a recommendation for a booster dose, then doing it on the basis of when you can show a decline in protection makes sense. If we look at the UK data, with the advent of the new variants, an interval of approximately 20 weeks seemed to be appropriate for them, but they made their decision based on data. Since we have no data on vaccine effectiveness, we can set any time interval we want.
You're suggesting that you are plucking monthly figures out of the air, and it really doesn't matter whether the gap is, as you put it, 6, 9, 3, or 12 months. There's no real scientific data research-based logic behind it.
There is currently in India no evidence that allows us to set a date for boosters.
That's very clear indeed. Tell me, what has become of the trials carried out by your own university, the Christian Medical College in Vellore, of heterologous boosters? I'm told the results were made public to the government, slightly wrongly phrased by me. I'm told the results were submitted to the government in the middle of March, which means they've been with the government for almost 3 months. Why aren't they in the public domain?
I think that's something you want to ask the government, but we've decided that we've waited long enough and we're going ahead with submitting the paper for publication.
Now, this is wonderful news. When will the paper be submitted for publication?
This week.
In which case, can I ask you to share with us the broad outlines of what you found about heterologous vaccines?
The data are already reported by the press, sometimes accurately, sometimes inaccurately. But essentially what the data showed was that and remember that this is only a safety and immunogenicity study, not looking at effectiveness. But if you had 2 doses of Covishield and got either Covaxin or Covishield, you made a better immune response with Covishield. If you had 2 doses of Covaxin and got either Covaxin or Covishield, you made a better immune response with Covishield.
In both instances, you had a better response with Covishield. Isn't that what you just said?
That's correct.
Now, you say the figures were released or leaked or somehow found their way into the press. Let me quote to you what I've gleaned very carefully from the press. Tell me if I'm right or wrong. A third Covaxin after 2 Covaxins increases antibodies 6 times, but from a very low base. Secondly, a third Covishield after 2 Covishields increases antibodies 6.8 times, but from a very much higher base. A third Covaxin after 2 Covishields, i.e. this time it's heterologous, only increases antibodies 2.5 times. A third Covishield after 2 Covaxins, again heterologous, increases antibodies 58 times. So clearly, in terms of heterologous vaccination, Covishield scores fairly significantly above Covaxin.
Well, heterologous vaccination only if you've been vaccinated with Covaxin, not with Covishield. I think if we look at protein vaccines, we may find that we could improve the response for Covishield as well with heterologous vaccination. But these data are also very similar to data that has come from other parts of the world where they've looked at boosting inactivated vaccines, people who had received inactivated vaccines as their primary series, with either vectored vaccines or mRNA vaccines. You get a better response if you use a different platform.
Absolutely, but I'm right in saying that in fact your test was only checking out Covaxin versus Covishield. You didn't use protein vaccines. Am I right?
No, we did not.
And am I right in saying that the results I read out to you are correct?
They are correct.
Thank you very much for that conversation. Let me now put to you what the Hindu reported on the 17th. It claims, and I'm quoting the paper, that the Standing Technical Subcommittee of NTAGI, and here's the quotation, found a lack of uniformity in results upon mixing of jabs for booster shots and stated that no recommendation for it can be made as of now. To my ears, that sounds like a polite way of expressing a lack of confidence in your findings. How do you read that sentence?
I think the Hindu must refer to its sources to see whether that quotation is accurate or not.
In other words, there are people in the sub-technical group of Entagi who are deliberately saying things that may not be true. That sounds to me, forgive me using a colloquialism, like a bit of mischief making.
I think a lot of what is published in the press is not necessarily accurate. The data that you read out are, in fact, the findings. And I leave it to the government and its committees to make the decisions that they must make.
Thank you very much.
Our job as scientists is to generate the evidence and try to get people to make sensible decisions.
Thank you very much for that double confirmation. And I'm going to repeat the most important bit of it again, because it's something the audience would be very interested in and something the government should take note of. A third Covishield after 2 previous Covaxin increases antibodies 58 times compared to a third Covaxin after 2 previous Covishields, which only increases antibodies 2.5 times. So clearly, when people are having boosters, it's a Covishield you need if you've had 2 Covaxins. It doesn't quite matter so much what you take if your original was Covishield. I thank you for this. I think it's a very important finding. Yes, please go ahead.
Can I just add a couple of things? Just to be absolutely clear, these are people who were given the booster dose about 6 months after they had received their primary immunization. These data are based only on antibodies and do not necessarily speak to the T cell responses. And the 58 times for Covaxin does start from a lower bar, but if you compare people who had received 3 doses with Covishield priming and with Covaxin priming, you actually wind up with a higher concentration of antibodies in the Covaxin primed, Covishield boosted individuals. So both vaccines are doing good. And quite frankly, my colleague, Dr. Winsley Rose, who led the study, has left us with lots of interesting things to explore in the lab.
Absolutely. But the critical sentence was for people who were primed with 2 Covaxin, Covishield increases the antibodies substantially. And I take your point that we're talking about antibodies and not T cell responses. Professor Kang, thank you very, very much indeed for this interview. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. Thank you for your time. Goodbye.